Asterisk. In the year 190 BC, the world held its breath. On a plain in Asia Minor, two visions of power prepared to collide. On one side stood Antiochus the Great, king of the Seleucid Empire. Commanding over 300,000 soldiers wore elephants, armored cavalry, mercenaries from across the east, a force so vast it seemed unstoppable. Facing him was Rome, fewer in number, but forged in discipline, hardened by wars against Carthage, and guided by the legendary Scipio Africanus. What happened next was one of the most shocking reversals in history. In just a single day, an empire's dream collapsed, and Rome's destiny as master of the Mediterranean began. This is the story of the Battle of Magnesia, where numbers crumbled and strategy reigned supreme. Asterisk. After Rome crushed Carthage in the Punic Wars, the small Italian city-state transformed into a rising giant. Victory in the West gave the Romans something more dangerous than power. It gave them ambition. And now their eyes turned eastward, toward the fractured kingdoms that still carried the fading torch of Alexander the Great. In the east, another dream was unfolding. Antiochus III, known as the Great, ruled the Seleucid Empire, stretching from Persia to Asia Minor. He imagined himself as the heir to Alexander's legacy, a man destined to rebuild a world-spanning empire. His armies were vast, his resources abundant, and his confidence unshaken. To his followers, he was not just a king, he was the rebirth of a conqueror. But Antiochus made a fateful mistake. He marched into Greece. For him, it was just another territory to claim. For Rome, it was an insult too great to ignore. Greece was more than land. It was the cradle of philosophy, art, and culture, the foundation of Western identity. Rome, which had absorbed so much from Greek civilization, could not stand by, while an Eastern monarch sought to claim it. The Senate responded with steel. They dispatched Lucius Cornelius Scipio Africanus, a young general hungry for glory, and alongside him traveled his brother, Scipio Africanus, the man who had once defeated Hannibal at Zama, the man who had saved Rome from annihilation. The stage was set. East against West, a massive empire of sheer numbers against a republic forged in discipline and strategy. Two visions of the ancient world were about to collide on the fields near Magnesia. What would follow was not just a battle, but a turning point that would shape the destiny of the Mediterranean for centuries. Dawn broke over the plains of Magnesia. From a distance, the land seemed to tremble as two vast armies readied themselves. Dust swirled in the air like a curtain about to rise on a play the world would never forget. On one side stood the might of the Seleucid Empire. King Antiochus III gazed proudly across a force that stretched as far as the eye could seem. More than 300,000 soldiers gathered under his banner. It was a spectacle meant to intimidate, to overwhelm not only the enemy's body, but also their spirit. At the center, the legendary Macedonian phalanx stood like a wall of iron. Thousands of men carried 6-meter spears, their ranks packed tight, a living fortress advancing step by step. On the flanks, Antiochus placed his cataphract heavily armored cavalry. Men and horses sheathed in steel, designed to smash through enemy lines like unstoppable juggernauts. And towering above them all, the war elephants, massive beasts brought from the east, their roars echoing across the plain, their tusks fitted with steel. They were not just weapons, they were fear incarnate. Antiochus believed that with such numbers, such power, victory was already written. He trusted in size, in spectacle, in the raw terror of his army. Across the field, the Romans stood in stark contrast. Their numbers were smaller, perhaps a tenth of Antiochus's host. But in their ranks pulsed something different, something sharper: discipline, unity, purpose. Roman legions fought not in rigid blocks, but in maniples, smaller, flexible units, able to shift and adapt. Each soldier carried the gladius, a short sword designed not for showy slashes, but for quick, precise thrusts that ended lives with brutal efficiency. Their shields locked together, their movements drilled into instinct. They were not an army of individuals, they were a machine of war. At their head, Lucius Cornelius Scipio Africanus prepared to command his first great campaign. But behind him stood the shadow of greatness, Scipio Africanus, the hero of Zama, the man who had shattered Hannibal's dream. His presence alone was a warning. Rome knew how to break giants. As the sun climbed higher, light flashed across thousands of spears, helmets, and shields. Two visions of warfare, one relying on overwhelming force, the other on discipline and cunning now, faced one another across the plain. The air grew still, hearts pounded, and in that silence, the world seemed to hold its breath. The next moments would decide not just the fate of two armies, but the balance of power in the ancient world. The sun rose high over Magnesia, and with it came the sound of war. Trumpets blared from the Seleucid lines, deep and thunderous, and the earth began to shake. The first to advance were the giants, the war elephants. Their roars split the air, tusks glinting in the sunlight, their massive feet pounding the earth like drums of doom. Soldiers clung to towers strapped on their backs, firing arrows down as the beasts surged forward. For Antiochus, this was not just an attack, it was terror made flesh, meant to break Roman courage before swords even clashed. But the Romans did not scatter. At a signal from Scipio, the legionaries unleashed volleys of javelins, arrows, and piercing trumpet blasts. The strange sounds and sharp pain panicked the elephants. Confused, enraged, the beasts turned not toward the Romans, but back upon their own ranks. The mighty phalanx, meant to be protected by the elephants, now found itself crushed beneath their trampling feet. The Seleucid army's greatest weapon had betrayed them. Then came the phalanx itself, heads of thousands advancing in perfect formation, spears lowered like a forest of death. To face the phalanx head-on was to charge into a wall of iron. Yet the Romans had no intention of doing so. Their maniples darted and shifted, slipping into uneven ground where the massive blocks of soldiers struggled to keep order. With shields raised, the Romans pressed in close. Their gladius was short, but deadly, sliding between armor plates, stabbing into unguarded thighs and throats. One by one, the cracks in the phalanx widened, and what had seemed indestructible began to fracture. On the flank, Antiochus himself led his cataphracts, a tide of steel-clad horsemen, thundering into the Roman lines. Their charge was devastating, scattering cohorts and sending men tumbling beneath hooves and spears. For a moment, it seemed as if the Seleucid king had found the path to victory. But Antiochus made a fatal mistake. In pressing too far, too fast, he left the heart of his army, the phalanx, exposed. Scipio Africanus, watching with the eyes of a master strategist, saw the opening. With a sharp command, he ordered the legions forward. Cohorts surged into the gap, cutting the massive phalanx into pieces. The Seleucid formation collapsed. The great iron wall crumbled into chaos, soldiers fleeing in every direction. Antiochus, too far away to rally his men, could only watch as the strength of his empire disintegrated before his eyes. The field of Magnesia became a slaughterhouse. The air filled with screams, the clash of steel, and the thunder of Roman victory. What had begun as a display of overwhelming power was ending in panic, in ruin, in blood. By the time the sun dipped westward, the plain of Magnesia was unrecognizable. Where once had stood a mighty host of 300,000, now there was only silence broken by the cries of the wounded. Shattered spears littered the ground. Broken shields lay like fallen leaves, and the colossal bodies of war elephants sprawled, lifeless, across the earth. Antiochus, the great king who dreamed of reviving Alexander's empire, fled the battlefield. His banners trailed in tatters, his men scattered. In a single day, his pride had been reduced to ashes. What was meant to be a demonstration of power had become a symbol of humiliation. Ancient accounts speak of staggering losses, tens of thousands cut down in mere hours. Some chronicles claim hundreds of thousands never rose again from that battlefield. Whatever the true number, the image was clear: the Seleucid war machine. Once the terror of the East had been broken beyond repair. News of the disaster spread like wildfire. Greek city-states, once cautious in choosing sides, now saw the truth. Rome was the new arbiter of power. The Seleucid Empire, still vast on a map, had lost the one thing an empire cannot survive without fear and respect. 2 years later, in 188 BC, the humiliation was sealed in ink. The Treaty of Apamea stripped Antiochus of his ambitions and his dignity. Every territory west of the Taurus Mountains was surrendered. His once proud fleet was dismantled. The seas would no longer carry Seleucid sails. A crushing indemnity of 15,000 talents of silver bled the empire's coffers dry. And perhaps the most bitter wound, his own son was sent to Rome as a hostage young Antiochus the Fourth Epiphanes. Who would grow up beneath the shadow of his father's defeat? What remained of the Seleucid dream was only fragments. A king still sat on the throne, but the empire was shackled, its might broken, its destiny stolen. Rome, meanwhile, emerged from Magnesia, not only victorious, but transformed. No longer was it simply a Western power. Rome had announced itself as the master of the Mediterranean. Allies like Pergamon and Rhodes bowed to its leadership, and enemies trembled at its name. The message of that battlefield was clear. Even a giant can fall in a single day, and when it does, the world itself shifts. The Battle of Magnesia was more than a clash of armies. It was a turning point, a single day that reshaped the destiny of empires. For Antiochus the Great, it was the end of a dream. Once hailed as a new Alexander, he now bore the mark of failure. His empire, though still vast on parchment, had been crippled in spirit. No number of men, no herd of war elephants could erase the shame of Magnesia. The Seleucid Empire would stumble on for years, but never again as a true power. For Rome, Magnesia was a revelation. Here, on foreign soil, with far fewer men, they proved what made them unstoppable. Discipline mattered more than numbers. Strategy outweighed spectacle, and a single mistake by a leader could decide the fate of nations. This was not just a Roman victory. It was a declaration that the Republic had outgrown its borders, that Rome was destined to be more than an Italian power. Magnesia marked the moment when Rome became the true arbiter of the Mediterranean, the empire making that would soon dominate the known world. But beyond the clash of empires lies a lesson that echoes across centuries. Numbers alone do not guarantee victory. Strength, without order is weakness. Dreams without wisdom collapse under their own weight. Even giants can fall in an instant, while the disciplined few can change history. Perhaps that is why Magnesia still matters. It reminds us that in our own struggles, whether personal, political, or cultural, it is not always the largest force that triumphs, but the one that is most prepared, most united, most resilient. Magnesia teaches us that history is written not just by the powerful, but by the disciplined, the strategic, the relentless. A battle of hours decided the fate of centuries. And in that truth lies a warning and an inspiration for us all. If this story intrigued you, give this video a like, share it with others who love history, and subscribe to Empire Unveiled Legends, because myths hide truths, and the truths of history are often more incredible than legend.